these guys, Herbert et al. 2022, actually make a point that I agree with in this paper, believe it or not. They say, many of the metrics traditionally used to define excellence, such as hailing from elite institutions, are proxies with considerable inherent bias. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And I actually did not look into the histories of the authors of this piece. I don't know if they came from elite institutions, but it's absolutely true. And elite institutions means something slightly different in each field. You know, there are always universities in every field that are, you know, top 10 for that field that maybe as an outsider you wouldn't inherently intuit. But many of the metrics traditionally used to define excellence, such as hailing from elite institutions, are proxies with considerable inherent bias. This is absolutely true, and it's part of why we rail against not just elitism, but the institutions who basically prize themselves on being elite and on the very idea of being elite, in part also because what we saw, again at Evergreen, which was, you know, we loved it. I'm saying this with love for the institution as it was, maybe the opposite of an elite institution. If one of the measures by which you would assess whether an institution is elite is the acceptance rate of the applicants, right? So Evergreen basically accepted every single person who applied. It had something above a 99% acceptance rate. And most people who heard that number assumed that Evergreen was ashamed of it and really trying to get that number down because isn't the number of people you turn away a sign of how amazing you are? And there is some truth sometimes in that assessment, but what we found was that this allowed people to sort once they were there. And did that mean that a lot more people walked away? Yeah, I think it did, because Evergreen was quite unique and it wasn't for everyone and everyone wasn't for it. So even though it took most comers, a lot of people decided after arriving there that it wasn't the right fit. And unfortunately, there was a whole lot of grift and graft there. And so you could find some programs, some faculty who would just basically help you get a degree if you didn't do anything. But at least in the sciences, at least in some parts of the sciences there, for a long time, it was possible to do extraordinarily high quality work, even if, and we would argue in some cases, maybe especially if, your experience up until that point academically was one of being told, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, oh, you've got ADHD, you've got anxiety, you should need to be on pharmaceutical drugs, you can't do the math, you don't read well enough. And very often those people were brilliant, extraordinarily capable, had real life experience that demonstrated their capacities. And what they needed was an environment that didn't judge them based on a checklist and actually assessed whether or not they could think.
Yeah, the problem is one of high variance. Yes. The fact that Evergreen did not turn people away meant that there were people there who just simply weren't, you know, the euphemism was college ready.
Right.
But the number of people who absolutely were ready for the intellectual environment, but maybe didn't have the background or all of the skills necessary to slot well to be a good student in a normal college where they were anonymous.
To make a faculty in a college's life easier.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so the point was, if you had faculty willing to think carefully about why a particular student was not succeeding, and you had students willing to try to figure out, you know, how I can learn this in spite of the fact that I'm not good at X or Y. Mm-hmm. It was ideal.
Yes.
But, you know, it carries those two things together, and separating them would be a good thing to do, because a lot of those students that are, you know, in many cases our highest potential students are not a good fit for our system.
Yes, and therefore explicitly not a good fit for elite institutions. They are exactly who get missed by so-called elite institutions. Okay, one more sentence from this piece. We can do better, they say. Scientists, even as we are part of a wonderful universal system for generating knowledge, are not necessarily wiser or better than other human beings. Can you imagine writing that sentence and putting it into a published piece?
No, I really can't.
That's all. I don't know these guys. I don't want to take them on personally, but like, come on. Like that sentence, that tells me right there that all this talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is an act that you don't know what you're doing. Scientists aren't necessarily better than other human beings. What are you on about? That's an insane thing.
It's an insane sentence, you're right. It really is.
Yeah. Okay. Go for it.
I just wanted to add one more thing. We promised to come back to this question of denaming buildings, renaming them, recalibrating buildings, recalibrating the buildings. Mm-hmm. First of all, I just want to, I think it is Jonathan Haidt who did this first, but his point was, look, you got to choose. You can't have a social justice oriented university and a truth-seeking university. Mm-hmm. You have to pick between those things. And this is the type specimen of scientists pretending that you can do both. And the point is, look, the purpose of science is truth-seeking. Mm-hmm. And here's where they've buried the bodies. Mm-hmm. Their point is, well, are we really going to accept that scientists don't have an obligation to be decent people? No. The fact is, scientists have the same obligation as everyone else to be decent people, and it may exist in a somewhat different context because of the authority that is carried by having a scientific degree. Mm-hmm. But no, we need to be tolerant of the flaws of scientists. We need to recognize that people who have absolutely vile pieces of their character may also have transcendent insight. Yep. Right? I wish that wasn't the case. It would be cool if the best people were always the most insightful people, but it's not true. Mm-hmm. Isaac Newton was a fucking dick, right? Now, we are not going to de-Isaac Newton the physics textbook because the man was a jerk, right? Mm-hmm. Likewise, Edison. Likewise, R.A. Fisher, the father of statistics, mm-hmm. right? The father of statistics was an evolutionary biologist. His work was absolutely transcendent. Now, he was also an anti-Semite. Should I not listen to his insights on biology because he happened to be an anti-Semite? That doesn't make any sense, right? The fact is, what I should do is I should say, here is a deeply flawed person who had some insights about biology that were truly important and well ahead of their time. And I can live with those two things because I'm an adult and there's nuance in my mind, right? That is what we should be doing. Now, there is a question. There is a question about who you want a statue of on your campus and who a building should be named after. I don't think every time we find a flaw in somebody that we should go dename the building, right? That doesn't make any sense. But I do think there are cases.
Especially given how much real work needs to be done.
Right. First of all, there is real work. Second of all, you're also doing something to even the statues of people who we wouldn't today build a statue of, right? Mm-hmm. My feeling is, you know what? Cristobal Colon, who goes by another name, but...
Are you going to tell people what it is?
Christopher Columbus. That's how you say it in American. But Cristobal Colon, I don't believe is a figure that we should be especially honoring, especially as Americans. And it's not that I don't think that there was something about what he did that was important and probably involved a whole lot of personal strength. But the problem is, America is not downstream of Christopher Columbus, right? We are a people that includes Indians, right, who suffered greatly as a result of the personal strengths of Cristobal Colon. And so my point is, celebrating him together as a people doesn't really make sense, but I don't want to pretend he didn't exist either. Yeah. And I guess the point is, if there's a statue of Cristobal Colon, I think it should stay. Mm-hmm. Would I argue to put one up? No, I wouldn't, right? That's where we are. But I do want people...
And such is the nature of history. And we disappear our own history at our peril.
We disappear our own history at our peril. And frankly, I want to be able to stand in front of a statue that has a mixed heritage.
Indeed.
Along with a Native American and say, I get the problem of that guy. Right? And you get the importance of it.
And also, just the nature of public art, and by which perhaps I'm including the names of buildings, if on a public university campus or even a private university campus. But art that is available for people who are freely walking and can stumble upon it and say, oh, well, I wasn't expecting to see that. I don't want to be thinking about this right now. I didn't know anything about that. Well, that's ugly. Is it is it a better human experience to be guaranteed that you will never stumble upon something that makes you feel ill? That makes you feel a little gross or a lot gross or like, damn, genocide really here at this spot? I didn't know, and it was that guy. Why are we celebrating this guy? Well, maybe the public representation of a person or an event isn't inherently about glorification.
Right.
Maybe it's about representation, and representation also isn't inherently about celebration. Maybe all of this is a way of educating us and making us more aware both of our history and of what we are capable of in the future. And it shouldn't be, well, whitewashed, honestly, is a weird word to be using here, but it shouldn't be cleansed of all the things that a person who happens to be alive and making decisions in 2022 decides is the thing that needs to happen. Because we don't only exist at this moment. And it is beyond foolish to imagine that that's the world we live in.
Enough of this recalibration culture.